Hi everyone, welcome back. Elden Ring is a game I've had conflicted feelings about, so join me as I give it one final playthrough to determine, do I hate Elden Ring? This video is part of a series, so if you haven't seen it yet, you'll want to start with the first part. As a reminder, I'll be using spirit summons, but I'll be avoiding Black Knife Tish and Mimic Tear unless I am truly stuck. I'll also be avoiding commonly considered broken tools like Hoarfrost Stomp, Moonveil, and Comet Azure. The goal is to see if I enjoy how the game plays, not if I can make a build to trivialize it. Last time, I explored Liurnia of the Lakes looking for levels and equipment. This time around, I'm pushing through Raya Lucaria Academy for more levels and opening up the option to respec. With that, let's get back into it. Actually, wait. First, I want to clarify that I call this a game journal because it's my thoughts and how I was feeling moment to moment as I played through Elden Ring. My thoughts are subject to change as I go through. This isn't a critique or a deep dive, it's closer to something like a narrated Let's Play. Do I hate is obviously a bit of hyperbole, but love or hate, I won't have my final thoughts until I look back after finishing the game. Alright, let's start for real. Raya Lucaria is a pretty short legacy dungeon, but I was a little worried about taking it on. This was a nightmare on my first playthrough with a sorcerer. The enemies could cast faster than me, were resistant to my spells, and usually had a heavy-hitting melee enemy somewhere nearby. And there's been a bit of time between me playing through Liurnia and playing through the Academy. Combine that with my low vigor, and I was concerned about actually being able to beat it. Something I learned was that vigor starts giving better returns between levels 30 and 40 before it hits the first soft cap, and I really should have been at the 30 mark already. I could grind or maybe look for some catacombs first, but I decide since I'm here, I might as well give the dungeon a try. Any levels I can get will go into vigor, and if I really get stuck, I'll head elsewhere. There's still plenty to do in Liurnia. Before that though, I head to the Laskia Ruins. I'm not accomplishing much here, but I bought a heal spell and I'm going to use it. If nothing else, it shows how having the right item can trivialize certain fights. 2 successful casts and the Revenant's gone, and I wasn't even looking at it. I just barely meet the requirements for this spell, but the difference in experience is drastic. But I still have to mop up all the surrounding creatures, which is at least easy enough. The Revenant is what made this area hard, and with that gone, it's just a matter of finding them. I have to look for each one because I know if I leave any standing, I'll be eating hits I didn't have to. While I'm here, I might as well look for the hidden item in the area. I don't have to look too hard, this one isn't hidden behind any illusions. I get the Wraith Calling Bell for my trouble. Here's a really minor nitpick. I really wish there was a way to find new items easier. I had no idea what this was and didn't know where to look in my inventory at first. I eventually found it in the quick item category, but I thought it was a talisman at first. Even a glowing symbol next to the categories would be helpful. But again, very minor nitpick. And now I can use the ability the enemies I've been killing had. I might give it a try at some point. Alright, enough goofing off. It's back to Raya Lucaria. I've already made it past the entrance, so the next step is the graveyard. I try to open with Catch Flame on the zombies, with little success. Not only do I do very little damage with it, but I also don't feel like I'm doing much damage with my sword either. If there were just a few of them, that wouldn't be terrible, but there are a lot. It's not really challenging unless I aggro a bunch of them at once. Despite having a grab attack, it doesn't do that much damage, but if I want to bait them out one by one, I'll be here for a while, and there's still plenty of game left. And I'm already terrible at getting these out in a timely manner, so I rush past the ones coming out of the ground where I can. The arena here seems a bit more linear than Stormveil so far, but it still has a side path that lets me wrap around and get ahead of an ambush. I even get some Spirit Ashes from it. Dedicated range support might be useful. Once I'm past the bridge and don't have an undead army following me, I decide to proceed a bit more cautiously. Unfortunately, when I drop down to get the carrion armor, I come back up to an ambush. I should have probably known the item that was left in the open was bait, but I thought it would just alert the enemies in front of the door. It did that too, but I also get attacked from behind. Surrounded by 3 dogs that are perfectly staggering their hits, there really wasn't any other way this was going to go. That's a Souls-like for you. Put an item in the open and an enemy out of view. And I keep falling for it. I try again, but fall off the ledge while trying to deal with marionette archers and have to deal with a dog jumping in while dealing with their arrows. This one was a little more frustrating because it looked like I still had space. Until I didn't. I couldn't exactly stop attacking because of the marionette's annoying gimmick of going berserk when they've been hit. And I had little space to dodge, and trying to block would eat through my stamina. Since the marionettes weren't pushed over the edge, this one felt less like I had let my greed get the best of me, and more like I was just unlucky at best and was given different rules than the enemies at worst. Although it seems I had overestimated the space I had to dodge, because when I come back next time, most of their attacks sail over my head, though I do still take some hits. I push through to the next area, but I'm getting real tired of seeing dogs. There's always more than you think there are, and they have an annoying habit of outranging you. And when they hit, they always hit again, so if you face 2 dogs, one hit usually ends up being 4. Even trying to push them away with Storm Stomp only kind of works. It's a close call, but I am able to get past them this time, and make my way to the next grace. I'm grateful because I wasn't really feeling this area's visual design. I mean, the skybox is pretty, but the actual area is just graves and trees with not much else. And we already had plenty of that in Dark Souls 3. It's just, this time they're in blue. The layout isn't much better either. There are technically multiple paths, but when you look over your shoulder and see the other one, it can't help but feel a little lacking. Most of these aren't even paths, really. More like small extensions to the path you're already on. The next part is more interesting, at least. You have to take the water wheel up to get to the grace. Is this how the students get to class? Instead of continuing on, though, you can take the other side back down. About halfway down, there's another segment of graveyard with a bunch of items. There's another ambush, of course there is, but at least it's all in front of me, so I can bait things out with magic. The zombies are still tanky, and I'm being cautious, which means a lot of jump attack and backing off to keep myself safe. Not that it matters. After I clear the area, I miss a jump to a platform and die anyway. At least riding the water wheel down has a nice view. Looking up at Raya Lucaria gives something interesting to see while waiting for it to take you down. I don't go for the jump this time. I don't even know if you could make it. Instead, I ride all the way to the bottom, where there's a crystal cove and an abductor version. I'm not going to fight that. These things are massive health sponges and don't tend to be worth the trouble. Which isn't surprising, given that that description fits half the enemies in the game. What I will do is show off the little surprise that the game has for you if you die to it in a certain way. You just gotta grab the items in the arena first, including the Lost Ash of War. Then, if I die to the abductor, specifically its grab attack, it'll transport me to Volcano Manor. Before moving on, let's take a look at the talisman we got. Its description hints at an area back in Raya Lucaria, and that's a nice way to both add to the lore of the world and to reward the player for being inquisitive. Moving through this part of Volcano Manor is mostly linear, which is fine. This is partially a punishment, and fast travel has been locked, so the goal is to get to the next grace as fast as possible anyway. There are flying enemies with ranged attacks, so I make vigorous use of my magic, but this is still better than the trap chest that takes you to Caelid. At least there are no threads turning 90 degrees around corners. But the enemies do have an annoying habit of backing up over magma, making it risky to hit them, since every swing comes with a massive step forward. I don't even try to fight the fire slugs for that reason. And right when I'm almost at the next grace, I stop. I see an ambush. They're not moving, so they haven't seen me yet. Without moving, I start scrolling through my items, planning to top myself off with potions, just for it to scream and charge at me. I don't even realize it at first, and by the time I start moving, it's already too late. Grab attack, instant kill, back to start. The worst part is, I was almost out of range. I thought I was at first since the grab snaps me 2 feet to the side, but playing it back I can see that I was just barely in range. Still frustrating. And the animation didn't help. Why not move the enemy instead of the player if it lands? It'd still be kind of absurd, but it feels like that would be more fluid given that this thing is already jumping at me. Or, while I'm wishing, we could just get rid of grab attacks altogether. This is the 3rd enemy to make one since I've started this dungeon, and I have never found them fun. Worse still is when I make it back there, it happens again. I know you can't really tell, but I had just started my dodge roll too. Didn't matter. One shot, back to start. The next time, I don't even bother trying to fight, and just run to the grace. I could warp back, but there's still a little more to explore here. Unfortunately, even after picking up my runes, I still don't have enough for a level, and I already know I'm going to lose them here. At least the lava isn't an instant kill. I can get a smithing stone 4 out of it. I eventually make my way to a fog door, and it contains 2 abductor virgins. I'm basically killed instantly because they can push me around, even pushing me into their grab attack. Which is an instant kill. No, I'm not doing this. 1 would be bad enough, I'm not dealing with 2, knowing that my vigor is underleveled and my build may even be completely borked. I return to Raya Lucaria instead. There will be plenty of time for this later when I come back to Volcano Manor. Seriously, who thought that what the Bone Wheel Skeletons needed was a grab attack and triple the health? Back at Raya Lucaria Academy, and it's actually looking like an academy now. The critical path is still mostly a straight line, but looking for the hidden items is more engaging here. A few of which are hidden behind illusionary walls, but which the game hints at to the attentive player. Which is great. I wish I could leave it at that, but the very next room is one of the worst spots in the game. There are 4 mages who can cast faster than the player, in a giant jar that can do massive amounts of damage if you're careless. And there's a good chance that a 5th, maybe even a 6th mage may wander into the fight if you take too long. The best way I found to deal with it is to bait out the jar and then wait for the mages to turn around again, which honestly just feels like padding. There are places to stand to not have to dodge all 4 of them, but they won't last long once they start moving. So there's even more pressure to push through this quickly. And there's no grace before the boss fight, making the run back tedious, particularly when you're still learning it. There's another illusionary wall, the lack of books and nothing in front of it being a clue. There's a treasure chest in the room, but more interestingly is that on the second level, you can jump down behind the wall. This leads to a room with a talisman and a bunch of jars that will attack you if you grab it without thinking. If you're patient, you can pick them off one at a time, and they're weak enough that it doesn't take too long despite the numbers. I like this. It's about time I found more than one thing I like in this dungeon. It's a shame about what comes next. I want to like the fight with the Red Wolf of Radagon. I really do, but I found this fight incredibly frustrating. It didn't even take me that long. Less than 20 minutes in total. I've spent way longer than that on other bosses throughout From's games. I've spent way longer than that failing combos in BlazBlue. It's just that it felt like whenever I was making progress, it was only because the game was letting me. And whenever I lost, it felt like it was unlikely that I could have actually avoided the attack that killed me. Usually because it's never just one attack. Then there's the annoying runback. I eventually got it down to where I could consistently maneuver fast enough to avoid any damage, but with all the sorcerers with fast casting homing spells, there was always a chance I would take at least one hit before getting back to the boss. But let's focus back in on Clifford here. Part of the problem is how fast this thing is. It's going to set the pace of the fight. On its own, that's not actually an issue. The Dancer of Boreal Valley did the same thing, and that became a really fun fight once you stayed with the pace. The difference is that the Dancer tried to stay close to the player. Unfortunately, most of the Red Wolf's attacks have wide arcs that wrap around the hitbox. They often put you in a position where there's one right way to dodge to not get hit, or to try to dodge twice to get some space. But this is still Elden Ring, so there's a good chance that that will be punished as a panic roll. The Red Wolf also tends to back off very quickly, usually putting vast amounts of distance between the two of you. You may be noticing a trend with this. Its closing attacks aren't too bad to dodge, though one is tricky, but its most common overhead slam is actually really fun to dodge. And timing it right typically gets you some time to put some attacks in. On the other hand, there's one of the sword swipes that if the first hits, it causes you to stagger, guaranteeing the next hit will land, which does more than enough damage to kill me with where my vigor's at. If it was just this, then it would be on par with the other boss fights so far. Better, in fact. But I've been skirting around talking about a part of the fight, haven't I? This boss has access to the best spell in the game, the Glintstone Blade. Just like the one the player can use, it hangs in the air before it fires homing in. When it casts just one, it adds on pressure, making dodging other attacks harder, and puts more damage through shields that don't have magic resistance, pushing most builds towards more evasive tactics. It casts it often enough, but this one isn't the problem. Instead of only casting one, it can send out 3. Try to block them and they'll eat through your stamina. Try to dodge them, and you have a very narrow band to dodge all of them. An annoying tack on its own, but not fight-breaking. Key phrase being, on its own. All these fights vary wildly depending on how the moves are selected, but this one particularly so. I imagine players' feelings on this fight are going to vary wildly depending on what moves appear in what sequence. I even remember kind of liking it in my last playthroughs. The 3 homing shots on their own are tricky enough. Following up with an overhead slam attack is tricky but rewards good positioning with an easily punishable attack. On the other hand, you could get another magic missile before or after the set of 3, maybe even both. Or it could just fire out the set of 3 twice. I cannot express how frustrating this can be to try to dodge if you are even a little unlucky. You can try, but the attacks don't fire all at once, so you'll get hit, which will stagger you, so you'll get hit by a melee attack, then die. Or you can try to block it, and it will eat through your stamina, and you'll get hit by a melee attack, then die. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I didn't want to do it, but I gotta do it, so I'm going to do it. Let's compare this to Monster Hunter. Why? Because in terms of gameplay, Monster Hunter has been consistently doing everything that Elden Ring has been struggling to do. Obviously, this isn't a one-to-one comparison. The world design for both is fitting for each game's individual gameplay, so there wouldn't be a lot of point to comparing them there. How we can compare them, though, is in the moment-to-moment action of the fights. Specifically comparing the boss fights for Elden Ring to the large monsters from Monster Hunter. See, both games have been steadily speeding up gameplay and introducing more mechanics to make sure longtime players of their respective series are still being challenged. In fact, we can go one further because the Tobi-Kadachi has a very similar moveset to the Red Wolf. It moves quickly, it can change ranges fast, including getting above you where it's hard to hit, and it has a ranged attack that it can throw out quickly. Before we go further, we should examine the differences that changes how each game approaches a challenge like this. In Elden Ring, the Red Wolf is the mid-boss of the second Legacy dungeon, which may imply that it should be on the easier side of the game's overall difficulty scale. In reality, that's 3 fairly expansive regions in, so some difficulty is expected. Again, difficult as judged by From's scale. It'll also be the first time the player is likely to fight them in a playthrough. In comparison, Tobi-Kadachi will first be fought in low rank, essentially Monster Hunter's training mode. There will also be fights against it in high rank and master rank. It'll be faster and more aggressive, but the moveset is mostly the same, so any practice the player had previously will carry over at least somewhat. Monster Hunter also has an element of using the environment during combat. The recent games have had endemic life or environmental traps that can be used as tools. You have some level of control around where you fight as well. Even other monsters can be used to your advantage. The player has a lot of tools outside of what to bring to the fight, but the fights are designed to last a lot longer in comparison. Elden Ring fights are managed in arenas. Even overworld fights have an expected area you'll fight in. There are some similarities to preparation though. Both games expect the player to have some supply of healing items. Both games have things that may drain resources before or during the fight, though this may be more likely with Elden Ring. Both games have to plan around the player using a variety of different possible weapons. Both games balance the fights so they can either be soloed or done with help from others, and both games can send a careless player back to start. So why do I ultimately prefer the combat in Monster Hunter? The simple answer is the monster AI. I also prefer the complexity of Monster Hunter's weapons, but that's not a fair comparison, so we'll ignore it. Elden Ring has a more versatile toolkit and more potential builds in exchange. But really, it's the AI. Monsters in Monster Hunter have various states that they can be in throughout the fight. They start by passively wandering around the map after the player loads in. When the player engages them, they'll roar, stunning the player for a moment, and starting the fight proper. The big key here is that every monster has tells about what state it's in and what it's about to do well before it does anything. Even outside the extra tools that show the monster's state, everything can be seen based on what you see from the monster itself. An enraged monster will have white clouds coming from its mouth, a hungry monster will start drooling, and a wounded monster will start limping away. This creates a telegraph and allows the player to plan for the way the creature is going to fight. Combine that with the general behavior the monster already has, if not the individual move itself, and the player has a good ability to plan each part of the fight and organize their team. Oh, speaking of team, I mentioned that I felt that Monster Hunter balanced around multiple players better as well. A big part of that is that multiplayer has been an important part of the series since the beginning. Don't get me wrong, co-op has been in Souls since Demon's Souls, but there are plenty of people who will tell you it can trivialize the challenge in the fights. That's also possible in Monster Hunter if you play online with randos. It's entirely possible for someone to drop in with in-game armor and take on a monster without you contributing at all. However, it's much easier to avoid in Monster Hunter since co-op is the assumption rather than the exception. Elden Ring and FromSoft's games in general want multiplayer to be a passing, almost ephemeral thing. It's a fleeting moment of someone helping that you've never met before and may never meet again. It can be an incredible thing. Of course, that also comes with the other side of invaders, but at least by boss doors, you'll mostly find people trying to help, even if that help can have different definitions at times. Elden Ring added the Spirit Ashes to give a wider variety of player choice for getting help, not unusual since there have been NPC allies since the beginning. It's just now it's always available and completely in the player's control on how to use them. It's just the AI is usually not great about handling multiple attackers. What typically happens with From games when you have more than one person in a boss fight is one of three things. Best case scenario, well, best for victory, not necessarily most fun, but best case scenario is the boss will go back and forth between both fighters doing damage to it. Sometimes this results in a very easy fight where the boss doesn't really do anything, and sometimes it's still a frantic fight and the switch gives just enough room to catch your breath. It can swing heavily. The other possibility is it focuses entirely on the NPC or helper until they're defeated. This often happens with a player that's being too passive, but not always. NPCs will usually die quickly if this does end up happening. Spirit Ashes actually let you play with this a bit more, since you can choose a spirit with more or less health. You can decide how much breathing room your ally should be able to buy you. At least in theory. In my experience, the health of an ally is one of its more important aspects. With how aggressive bosses are and how much damage they can put out, then it doesn't matter if your ally can put out a lot of damage if they'll die in a single hit. And they will. There is a possibility to still make it work, and that leans into generating enough aggro and doing enough damage for the final possible scenario using an ally can have. You take all the aggro and the ally just takes pot shots. This can work and still be fun. When it doesn't, bringing an ally is basically pointless. Just a waste of resources, really. I do want to give credit to Elden Ring to actually have this be a potentially interesting choice. Ranged summon options or summons that are groups can give some viability. Unfortunately, even if the boss isn't focusing on your ally, the AI is dumb, and more bosses have get off me moves, so it's very easy to lose them anyway. You may have noticed that the behavior of the boss itself doesn't really change, it just switches targets. Distance and damage are the key factors that decide whether the boss will switch and when. Despite what I said earlier about the various states monsters have, I'm not going to pretend that at its core, Monster Hunter doesn't decide its targets in roughly the same way. Instead, what makes the difference in how the boss fights in a team is the kind of moves it has. Outside of the moves that are unique to each monster, there are a set of archetypical moves that most monsters share. Bites tend to knock down and stagger players working on damaging the head to balance out how much of an advantage being able to interrupt and knock down the monster is. Hip checks fire out quickly and clear melee attackers from most places around the monster, but in exchange, they're fast to dodge and mostly dangerous because of follow-up attacks. There's also usually some sort of tail swipe that both clears a wide area around the monster and potentially moves it around the field. Since each weapon is going to focus on a different area on the monster, it's important that all monsters have a tool set for dealing with any combination. Hammers focus on the head, so attacks can be designed around that assumption. Longswords on the tail swipes and hip checks. Part of knowing a weapon is learning how to deal with the monster countering your positioning. I should be clear though, From games are geared for a different pace. There's a heavy lean towards choices being made faster since the fights are much shorter. 5 minutes is probably going to be a fairly long fight in Elden Ring. Even the shortest missions in Monster Hunter still give you 15 minutes to finish them. There's a different kind of action that Elden Ring is going for, and I don't want these to be the same game, I just want Elden Ring to swing between experiences less. I don't want to have one run where I feel like I'm doing well just for the AI to decide it's time for me to stop playing, and then a run where I'm obviously playing poorly, but I win because the boss never used its cheat move. Before anyone says that doesn't happen, in my last playthrough, Melania used Waterfowl 4 times in a row. Anyway, I beat Renala's dog, playing significantly worse in the winning round. In a different scenario, or maybe with a different build, I probably would have liked this fight. Whatever. Rest up the Grace, level Vigor. That's going to be my pattern for a bit. Since Vigor doesn't give good returns until level 30, I need to pump it up before I get too much further. Would have been nice to know that sooner. The stat graphs in this game are nonsense, at least give me an idea how the numbers are going to affect my character. Alright, moving to the next area now. There's actually a hidden pathway right past the door. It brings you up and around to an upper level of the arena. That's fun. Usually there's more distance if you return to an area, so it's a nice mix-up to immediately see a challenge you conquered. I get the Radagon icon with shortened spellcasting time. That might be useful if I find I'm relying on spells more than I expected, but for now I don't plan to use it. Instead, I equip the Prince of Death's pustule to help me with my substandard Vigor. I should have done this a while ago. There's a drop down just past a couple of mages, but it's clearly an ambush. Rushing the mage is priority, and Storm Stomp keeps me from being overwhelmed by the surrounding pots. It looks like it might continue the path, but it just takes you back to the courtyard after the Red Wolf Arena. The courtyard has a lot of enemies, so I do my best to move cautiously and not be overwhelmed. That doesn't work, so rather than fight, I jump over a ledge to keep from fighting 10 enemies in a losing battle. I open a door so I can come back easily if I die, then continue down that path. At the end is some free runes, and another secret path that takes us across the rooftops of Lucaria. On the rooftops are some marionettes, and the lock-on and direction of the sword swings give me some trouble by constantly hitting walls instead of enemies. Past that, I lose my thoughts for a few minutes, and start just pressing buttons. I don't know why I did this. I think I was just starting to feel frustrated after the Red Wolf, but all I accomplished was knocking myself into a pit. There's no justifying this. This was dumb. Instead of focusing on progress, I run around the courtyard for a bit, picking up the items there. I still take a few hits, so I end up using a few healing flasks, but I at least get a golden seed out of it. Then I head back to the roofs. Dealing with the marionettes goes much better this time, and I'm able to retrieve my runes. Not too much farther away is another obvious ambush. I know there's an ambush, and I refuse to let the game bait me into it. Unfortunately, part of the ambush is a mage that fires that spiral beam spell. It's clear that it's supposed to pressure you into running at it just to be swamped by marionette gargoyles, but I refuse to engage in that. I worry about how to approach the engagement, firing a magic bolt at a gargoyle and it just hits a wall. I try to figure out how I'll be able to continue for a bit, but the mage just starts walking to me instead. Well, that solves that. The rooftops continue with a layout that can lead a careless player back to the last grace. But there's plenty of breathing room, so as long as you don't rush it, it's not too much trouble. Even the enemies are fairly spaced out in the open. Mostly. Letting you fight with an advantage until I'm ambushed by two gargoyle marionettes that jump down from above me. The first hit is clearly me being careless. After that, there's really nothing I can do. I can't run forward without risking falling or being knocked off the rooftop with how much these things can push you back. I can't focus on both enemies because one moves incredibly fast off my screen, so facing either one means not facing the other. I can't rush down the one I'm already locked onto because it immediately takes flight off the roof. I try to keep my shield up, but that is only useful directly in front of me. I still take hits from the side and above. And my stamina runs out quickly anyways, and any action I could try comes out slower than my enemies, so I'm stagger locked into a wall and die. This is where I took a good long break. This was not fun. If I didn't know the kinds of highs Elden Ring and From's games have, this is where I would quit. Honestly, when anyone says that From games are too hard for them, or aren't for them, this is the kind of thing I think of. If you quit after something like this and don't want to pick up the game again, I understand entirely. From's selling points have been its difficulty, its lore, its world, and its bosses. Difficulty for me is not a mark of quality. Difficult games can be good. Difficult games can be bad. Difficulty on its own does nothing for me. As much as I appreciate a challenge, what I really appreciate is the ability to use the tools the game has given me in interesting ways. And I would like to be able to use them even while I'm losing. Maybe I'll still fail, but I'd like to at least have the chance at victory. Otherwise, just kill me and get it over with, so I can get back to the game. Feel free to tell me to get good. I can already see the comments coming. Just keep in mind, the get good version of this fight would be an entirely different engagement. When I do finally load up the game again, I go back to the rooftops again. I proceed as cautiously as I can. I still get tagged by magic because it'll bend 90 degrees to hit me, but it's just a scrape. The game also does not seem to want to give me a backstab on a marionette despite being directly behind it. I still have good positioning though, so it's not a big deal. I just wish I had an idea why it wasn't being triggered. When I do make it back to the place I was ambushed, I try to approach more carefully. I try to get their attention with a spell, but I'm out of range. So I get a little closer. Still out of range. A little closer? No. By the time I am in range, they come down anyway. And then another enemy comes up from behind. If I weren't pushed through the window, I would probably have been killed again. Going through the other window gets me another ambush, but since it's only one, I actually have the ability to deal with it. Then the others I was fighting start making their way over to me. Magic deals with the first, almost finished the second before I run out, but he takes care of himself for me, and the last isn't a problem on its own. This round went a lot better, but it felt very much like a matter of luck. Dropping down in the building, and there are some mages, but dealing with them quickly means I only have to fight one at a time. There's another fight that can be difficult down a hallway. I figure I'm close to the end of this path, so I use my physic here. This was an incredibly one-sided fight. I finished with magic, but I was also luring him to a more open area to prevent bouncing off of walls if my magic ran out. There's a lot of good stuff for sorcerers here, but not much I can use right now. I still enjoy having these hidden paths to explore, for the most part. The spectacle and world building are wonderful, and I have enough runes for a level. Into Vigor it goes. A quick check through the courtyard again to pick up anything I missed, and then it's back to trying to make progress. Trying to being the key phrase here. My first attempt to get around the Abductor Virgin leads me to falling to my death. That's what I get for rushing. The rolling ball trap is actually easily avoidable since it has consistent behavior. It just takes a moment to observe it. Just past it is a Sending Gate. I wish the gates had more than one design. It feels like this could have used something more built into the setting to imply how people used it. As it is, it's just kind of there. But there's a nice surprise on the other side. The Church of Vows holds Muriel, aka the Turtle Pope. Muriel is arguably the best character not involved in the story. He both expands on lore and can teach spells from any book you bring him. And he never moves. You can always guarantee where he'll be. That utility and his attitude of optimism are really endearing. There's not much of an arc or a story here, so it's not super deep, but it is incredibly useful. While I'm here, I decide to pick up Glintstone Blade, possibly the best spell in the game to use without setup. I can't use it yet, so for now it's back to the Academy. There's a mini-boss on the path forward, who in 2 hits destroys my shield and parries me, killing me instantly. Yay. Second round I try to use Catch Flame, but that doesn't quite work and I don't make it much further. In my third attempt I try to use Storm Stomp, but by the time I can move again, the mini-boss is already dodging or blocking, so that's completely useless. Sometimes it will hit, sometimes the mini-boss won't dodge and it still won't hit. At this point, all I'm doing is delaying the fight rather than progressing on it, and my tools feel like they are being undermined. What finally does grant me victory is jump attacks. Almost exclusively jump attacks. Engaging. Then I die to a hidden enemy in the immediate next room. At least the mini-boss is out of the way. Past that though, there's a hidden path that the talisman we got earlier hinted at. Going up towards the belfry has a fight with 3 mages and a pumpkinhead. The arena is a little tight and the pillar in the center is as helpful as it is annoying. It makes it easier to deal with the mages, but can get in the way once you start focusing on the pumpkinhead. But this isn't likely to be anyone's first fight with the pumpkinhead by this point, so adding a slight challenge to the arena isn't a problem, and the mages are out of the way quickly. It's nice to have an enemy to fight where I can dodge and follow up with an attack for once. Defeating everyone up here turns off the boulder trap, making a quick run back to the boss. Which is good, because that's all we have left to do. Rennala is a 2-phase boss fight. My first playthrough as a sorcerer, I really struggled with this while learning the mechanics since locking on with so many enemies can be finicky. From does offer things in the fight to help. You have to interrupt 3 enemies casting the shield around Rennala, and you can hear them singing to pinpoint them. And you don't need to kill them, just interrupt them by attacking them. So this phase can go by quickly. I died my first time fighting this playthrough because I got greedy and was stunned when Rennala renewed her shield, and then crushed by a falling chandelier. Honestly, that's just funny. The thing that killed me on the second attempt is a little more frustrating. Rennala will start picking up the little ones around her and use them to start charging a powerful attack. It doesn't fire instantly, but the sound cue for when it does fire doesn't leave you a lot of room to dodge. I thought I had more time, but I didn't. Just a glancing shot was enough to kill me. It's frustrating, but this is mostly on me. I may not have known exactly what attack was coming, but I knew something was, and I knew I didn't have much health to work with. I should have just waited out the attack behind a bookshelf, and I likely would have won. This was on me. The third round goes much better. I still take a few hits, but I make it through. I do use my summon immediately to try to keep the attention off me. It doesn't really work, but it also doesn't really matter. After dealing the last hit, I have just enough time to use my physic to prepare for the second phase. The phase transition for this one is actually really neat. It's the first time that you hear from Ranni as Ranni the Witch, and shows off just how strong she is. It also shows a care for her mother. This is a spectacle when you first see it, and has even deeper meanings when looking back. This is good. Then there's the fight of the second phase itself. Ranni's idea of her mother at full strength. She staggers easily, and most of her attacks are easy to dodge. This was painful on my sorcerer though. The attacks are easy to dodge up close, not necessarily at range, and magic attacks outside of Rock Sling do almost no damage. Then the summons Rennala can bring in add a lot of pressure. A bad combination could probably lock someone out of being able to attack. You don't need to defeat the summons, just outlast them. And sometimes you can just get distance and go back to attacking Rennala, and the summon will probably vanish on its way back to you. Overall, I like the fight, but I feel, like the Red Wolf, that this is a fight that can swing hard one way or another depending on the random behavior Rennala decides to use. For this playthrough, there was a lot of darting away from the summons, then weaving around spells to start wailing on Rennala. It created a very dynamic fight, and even when I was worried about trading hits, like with the dragon, I knew that if I died, it was because I was being risky. The risk paid off though, and I beat the second phase on my first attempt. Now I can respec, if I had a larval tier. But I did get enough runes for a couple of levels. All of them, into Vigor, immediately. It doesn't quite get me to 30, but I'm close. It'll be a bit before the next Legacy dungeon, so I shouldn't be hitting Vigor checks as often until I'm able to fix that stat. But this is just showing how much of a pain a bad build can be to fix, so it'd be nice if it was easier to tell how these numbers were going to affect my experience. With Rennala beaten, we're done with the Raya Lucaria Academy. So overall, what did I think? I did not care for this at all, unfortunately. The first half is a graveyard, with not much interesting or compelling. Once you get to the water wheel, the layout and environment design is a lot better, but the encounters were very hit or miss. Mostly miss. There are a lot of enemies in cramped spaces that have fast, ranged attacks that are annoying to deal with. There's this encouragement to rush them down, despite that leading to obvious ambushes. The worst part is the hallway leading to the Red Wolf. The bosses themselves are fine conceptually, but can swing heavily depending on the moves you're forced to deal with. The Red Wolf caused me a lot of trouble here, whereas Rennala was fairly easy. It was the opposite for my first playthrough with a Sorcerer, and I remember both being fairly easy for my Faith build. In fact, this whole dungeon seems like it swings heavily based on the build you bring to it. That's not great when the ability to change builds is locked behind it. For now, I'll just be glad to put this one behind me. Next up, I'll be trying to level up in the rest of Liurnia before moving on. Thanks again for watching my video. What did you think of Raya Lucaria? Did you have trouble with the wolf or Rennala? If you were a sorcerer, did you get Roxton first? Remember to subscribe to be updated when I release a new video. If you want to support the making of these videos and other video game critiques, check out my Patreon. All my videos are put up on Patreon ad-free, and $10 patrons will get a shout out at the end of the next video. See you all next time.